Welcome to the Living Unconventionally podcast. I am your host, Chris Piak. Every week, I feature a new unconventionalist who has ditched her desk in order to chase her passions around the world. Every Monday, we talk about their epic travel adventures. We also talk about how they make their travels happen from a financial standpoint. Every once in a while, I will coach an aspiring unconventionalist. Together, we will figure out her biggest dreams, why these dreams are so important to her, and what will be the first steps towards her goals. If you aspire to be an expatriate or a digital nomad who travels around the world and can make a living anywhere, join our community of like-minded, travel-loving, adventure-seeking people. Join the Living Unconventionally community at livingunconventionally.com/Facebook. Ditching your 9-to-5 jobs and chasing your passions all around the world. That's the topic of this Living Unconventionally podcast. Hello, my name is Chris Piak and I am your host. And one thing that's really, really important if you dream of working as a digital nomad, location independent, wherever you want, is you need to be able to make connections and make friends in new places really, really fast. And today I have a guest who is extremely good at building new bonds in very different cultures in a very, very short time. Someone that I got to know over the last year a little bit better and appreciate him much more is my guest today, James Ritchie. Hello.
Hello, Chris. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you very much. James, what fascinates me about you the most? We have been working together over a year now. You from your home place in South Africa, myself here in Germany. And what fascinated me the most about you is how easily you are able to build new connections. I have introduced you to a lot of managers here in Germany over the last few years, and you simply have a knack for getting people to like you and to engage with you and to have a meaningful conversation, which is proved by the fact that now you are visiting here in Germany and I can't reach you because you're always in some kind of meeting.
Yes, that's very true. And just one quick thing, Chris, I'm actually, just to correct it a little bit, I'm from Australia. You said South Africa, but I'm from Australia, and one of the key things around that, though, Chris, is I've always believed in the way we travel the world and see the world is, one, we have to be open to understanding where people come from, what drives them, how do they live, what do they live like, and what can I learn from that? You know, it's all about we never stop learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't really realize that I said South Africa because I was thinking about Australia. You know what? You don't say mate enough. That's the thing, I guess.
I must admit, I probably de-Australianize myself because I often get mistaken here for British or Canadian or US or something else. But I'll put that into my little notebook about calling everybody mate.
Yes. As I said before, you really astonished me over and over with your ability to make connection. And I think the fact that you say you have to be open to new people, that's really plays an important role here. In a nutshell, could you give our listeners your number one advice when you plan to move to a different country somewhere in the future, or maybe even move from country to country? What's the most important thing that helped you to make connections so well?
Yep. Well, for me is be authentic. You know, be you and be who you are, but be open to not closing off your barrier or your thinking because of some cultural bias. We all have a bias in our life about, the way we've been brought up, the way we live, what we perceive the rest of the world to be. One of the things I've been very fortunate about, and it's from probably my parents, but, for me and my exposure as a very young professional man, I worked in Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, all around Australia. I've extensively travelled through Africa, Europe, all those sorts, Asia, and I have a passion to understand how things work. And that means how do they work in cities, how do families work, how do dynamics work, but don't give them a cultural overlay of I know better, because I think it's counterproductive.
Yeah. Yeah, you said yourself it's so important to stay curious and not basically always make assumptions, which can be very dangerous, as you experienced yourself in Papua New Guinea. You made assumptions once.
I can give you a really good example. I was about assumptions, and the other thing about things, also be open to communicate and communicate openly and honestly. And it's not about language as such. Do I know the Deutsch language? Do I know the Papua New Guinea Pidgin English? But it's actually about receptive to communicate with people. I'll give you an example, Chris. I was working in Papua New Guinea, and I was a relatively new manager of people working in Papua New Guinea. I had a very diverse workforce of Europeans, Australians, Papua New Guineans, and I was sitting in the office. We had a gentleman that worked for me who was a very lovely man, and he said to me, he was a little bit bored and he had very little to do this day, and he asked me if he could clean my company vehicle, which was full of dirt. It was in the middle of in the jungle of Papua New Guinea, and I said, go for it. Fantastic, that'd be great. And about 45 minutes later, one of my colleagues comes into the office and says to me, all he says in a very dry, sort of iconic Australian sarcastic way, your car is very clean. And by his tone, and I understand obviously the Australian humour, I thought something's not quite right here. So I walked out to the front of the office where my car was, and it was perfectly clean. It was spectacularly sparkling clean. And then I happened to notice, though, as I was looking at the car, the young man that was working for me looks up at me and says in Pidgin English, basically, the car, clean, true, good, boss. And I looked and I said, yeah, it looks really, really good. And then I started to notice, and when you start to absorb what's going on, and I realised that he's actually cleaning the inside of the car. And the inside of the car, what he had done is put a hose into the window and was filling up the car on the inside. And it was full of water by this stage. And I just sat there and went, interesting. Then what came out was, we opened up the car and the water floods out. It cost me a lot of money to get the car fixed, but I couldn't be angry with him at all, in fact, because what I failed to do was to ensure that the communication was clear and that I knew what he knew, because his objective was to make the car the cleanest it could be for me. And he exceeded that by a long, long way. So for me, it was one of my learnings of when I communicate, am I clear about my communications? Is it understood, even if I can't speak the foreign language? And then what should I have done about learning from that? And how do I learn now, many years later, when I put out a task to somebody in a different culture, even now in the Australian culture, I will double check to make sure, and I reflect on that day every day. And he was such a wonderful worker. How could I be annoyed at that? It was just a point of I failed to communicate or to find out what drove and what was his skills, and just assumed everybody knows how to clean a car.
Yeah, I can really imagine this. I see this even within Europe. I see these differences in communication, because we all have different assumptions that we bring into our conversation, and we often fail to understand that for someone else the world might look very, very different. For example, I see this always when German managers communicate with British people. The British person will say, well, I nearly agree with you. And and the Germans think, oh, well, we are nearly there, we solved it very well. So when in reality, of course, the British person means like, no way,
Yeah, that's right. It's the polite way of saying we're a long way off, but we can't say no.
Mm-hmm. So now, as I understand, your plan for you and your family for the moment is also to break up. Do you say break up to new beaches or to
explore new horizons?
Exactly, and you have set your mind to Europe to have a look here in Europe. And what I noticed very well over the last 6 months or so, I don't know, I introduced you maybe to about 100 people or something like that, roughly. Yep. And two things that really strike me, and I would like to pick your brain here because I think it's really, really useful for the listeners to learn the skills. Is that not only you get a lot of people to agree to talk to you because I introduce you to them and they are very open to get into a communication with them, but you also manage to transform this first introduction into a really meaningful relationship, which I see a lot of my coaching clients, they struggle a lot with in the beginning. Yep. But you really have a knack for that. How come, to give a concrete example to our listeners, first to understand the situation, what I would usually do is you tell me, hey, there's this person that I find interesting. Could you make an introduction? So I reach out to this person. And when they say, yeah, sure, introduce me to James, I put both of you into a group chat in LinkedIn or in Xing and send a short message introducing both of you. And what happens with a lot of my coaching clients is then after that, there's total silence. So my coaching clients will say, hey and hello and so, and there's no response from the person that I introduced them at first. But you don't have this problem. What do you do differently?
Well, for one, it's my basic premise of operating is that we all have something to share and something to learn. And so I always, from a practical point with that, Chris, I look straight away, once you have done your introduction, I do it really quickly to them, but it's very respectful, but very specific. And I try to either connect to them either on a topic or something that motivates them.
So you start from them, not from you.
Yeah, no, that's right. It's got, to be honest, Chris, the way I look at everything in life, it's got nothing to do with me. If I can't understand who they are and what they're about and what may drive them and what may trigger their thinking, they'll never talk to me. That's how I do business in a negotiation sense, in a commercial sense, in a partnership sense. If I don't understand and don't take the time to try to, and I'll call it for a better word, understand the emotional intelligence of our relationship, we go nowhere.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us an example how this might look like? So we are in a group chat in LinkedIn. I just said, let's say for the sake of the argument, I introduce you to Suzanne, and I say, hey, Suzanne, this is James. James, this is Suzanne. And what happens then?
So I would then go straight up and it's obviously about practicalities because, when I'm based in Australia, I'm sort of 8 hours away. But if I see you do it in Germany, I try to do it within the hour that I respond to both of you and saying, thank you for the introduction. Susanna, I will be in touch directly with you. And then within minutes of that, or within the next 10 minutes, I've already researched about who is Susanna on Xing, LinkedIn, where does she work, is there some way I can find out what her interests are? Like I use Xing for what do they have and what do they want, and try to unpack where can I give value to that.
What would be one snippet of information that you would find out about Susanna that you then would use to further the introduction?
So for example, on Xing, they have in the HABs, I want an interesting contact is often put in there. I would then link if it's an interesting contact she's looking for, I would then look at what does she have and what do I have and can I share something or give her something in return? So it could be, for example, there was one I did, and for a word, we can call her Suzanne. they wanted an interesting contact, and they were very interested in the Sustainable Development Goals. So I wrote to her in a very short thing on Zing saying, thank you, I've been introduced to you by my mutual contact, Chris Piak. I see you're looking for a special contact, and that I noticed that we have a passion for the Sustainable Development Goals. I would love to organise a time to share my learnings from Australia, Asia Pacific, and I'd love to tap in and understand what's happening in Germany and Europe.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And 9 times out of 10, people are either curious or, yep, that makes sense because I'd like to hear what's going on in that part of the world. Or it could be a subject. It could be a bit about how do you manage diverse teams. Could be a bit about how do you do, I've got a long, strong commercial background. So it could be tactical, or it could be about, for example, there was one person, how do you manage diverse teams? And I said, well, I've managed international cultural teams. I'd love to have a conversation about how do you do that in Germany?
Mm-hmm. So you find shared interests that are really important to the other person.
Yep. And something that you've got some, I don't mean expertise in, but something that you've got a shared passion, or something, or you can share something. And that's even with coming on this trip, Chris, one of the successes is people are going, well, you're making an effort.
Yeah.
Like today I met with the African Verein, and they thought it was unusual that an Australian was coming to talk to them about the German business relationships with Africa. Well, I do a lot of in my personal life, I do a lot of work in Africa from a pro bono friend, volunteer point of view, and I've got a passion. They were happy to see me today and gave me a whole lot of information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this is really the one gift that anybody, in my opinion, not only anybody who wants to live a location-independent lifestyle and want to be able to travel the world, but literally anybody who has to earn a living nowadays. What we all have to learn, we have to find those people who share the same passions with us, the same interest with us, and build strong relationships with them. Not superficial relationships, where you have a million friends and none of them will be there for you when you need them, but strong, deep relationships.
I apply, in many ways it's about who I am as a person, Chris. I apply most things, as you've probably got to know me a bit better, I'm all about integrity, respect, value, those sorts of things as part of who I am as an individual. But I look at when the same as if I'm working in a team, the key things to managing teams or leading teams is having a purpose, a behavioural framework, and strong professional relationships. And that's delving further or deeper than let's just go for a beer at the pub and we become drinking mates.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like I want to understand, even with you and I always want to understand what drives Chris. Why is he doing this? How does that work? And why does that go? And I'm always inquisitive and curious. And I'm open to people, I don't mean criticising me, but constructively saying to me, that won't work here, James, because you've got to think of these things. You've got to do that. I actually take that feedback and relish it, and I'm open to that.
And I'm sure we Germans relish in telling you where you're wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We have a word for that. We call it Bedenkenträger. Concern carrier would be the English translation.
Exactly. That's right. Somebody said that to me yesterday, Chris. That was very, very funny. But in saying that is that, for me, it's actually ultimately, I love culture. I love people. I love what drives it. I learn. I'm a better person from putting myself out there and taking a risk and doing different things, like, as I say, taking the risk and saying, I'm going to go work in Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, all around remote Australia, do volunteer work in the middle of Africa, go, work in different parts of the world, makes me, I think, and that's all it sort of in some cases matters, makes me a better person, makes me understand people.
Absolutely. And you know what I find so hopeful is that what really makes me hopeful and which is also really exciting is that no matter where you go into the world, you will find people with whom you have a shared interest, and not only on a personal level, on a values level, but also in terms of your career and your professions. For example, when you said yourself you're Australian, no one would think that maybe you have ties to Africa, but you do. And you find people here in Germany who also have ties to Africa, and that's a foundation to start something together. So, and that's for our listeners, whatever your passion is, whatever drives you, the beauty is that you can find everywhere in the world people who have the same passion, and you can seek them out, build strong relationships with them across continents, and work together with them for a greater good, and for something that can also feed you no matter where you are in the world. But the key is really to have strong relationships. That's what I feel, not superficial la la la. So how do you get to this level? Because of course not everybody will. What you want to do, in my opinion, is of course you don't want to be just chatting via email or via LinkedIn. To have a personal bond, you want to be able to have like a face-to-face conversation or a phone conversation. How do you get people to take time out of their busy day to sit down with you on the phone or in person and have a chat?
You know, I think it's actually something that's fascinating, Chris, by the way, is I think most people, we are built with sort of, I call it structures in our head, where we want to control, we're not quite sure what you can bring or what you can do. But one of the things for me I often look at is, I don't look at things often in tasks. I look at things in outcome. So what outcome do I want? What outcomes do we need? So I often think about, what outcome do I want from that conversation? Well, my outcome is I want to be able to prove to the person that, one, I've got something valuable to say, that they can take and use it. Two is that I want to be clear about there's an outcome that I want, I need something. And sometimes it's about being a thought provoker in trying to get the conversation. And it's also being actively listening. So if I get to a point where I try to convince them in the written word to give me an opportunity to talk to them, when I talk to them, I am always thinking about the outcome. Mm-hmm. And so what I mean by that...
Yeah, what I'm still confused about is, how do you get them to the point that they actually sit down with you?
Well, normally I invite...
Because very often there's a first conversation and then there's a long silence.
Yeah, well, the first one is try to get it quickly as possible. So if I've said to them, I've reached out on the connection, I say, can I have 10 minutes to talk to you about this topic, this topic that we're aligned with, that we're passionate about? Oh, would you have time in the next week? And then I follow them up if I haven't heard anything, saying, and sometimes it might be follow up with a little bit of a link to something. Like there's one time I hadn't heard anything from anybody, from a person, for about 3 or 4 days. So I sent them a note saying, I'd like to catch up to talk about this topic. Then a couple of days later, I would follow up saying, just following up to see if you have any time in your busy schedule. And by the way, here's a link to an article that I saw the other day that may be of interest.
Mm-hmm. So you constantly prove to them that you have their interest in mind as well. Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm saying about that authenticness. You've got to be authentic about it, and it's got to be real to you, and you've got to have a purpose for why you're wanting to do it. And some people, you'll get some people just too busy, or sometimes what happens is, you'll follow up 2 or 3 times, and then they'll come back and apologise because they've been too busy. But we now have a bit of space.
Mm-hmm. And
it's always been, I actually, I manage that relationship really, really carefully and quickly, because I watch, I trend and see what they're doing. Are they on LinkedIn or Zing? Mm-hmm. Are they on there posting things and doing things and they haven't responded to me? Or is it that this radio silence? Okay, I'll just keep being engaging and trying to, I call it like the fisherman, put something in the sea with a bit of a hook on it, with a bit of a bait, and see if they'll grab it. And if you're authentic about it, and I've been surprised more so than I thought, Chris, on this adventure, was I've caught more fish that way than I thought I would.
Well, you came to Germany now for a few weeks.
Yep.
How many in-person conversations did you line up before you came?
I've got about all up, absolutely dedicated conversations, about 40.
40 out of 100
Yep.
originally. Wow.
And I've got about I've got probably about 10 or 20 that are saying, when you turn up, like I had one tomorrow, which was, when you turn up, let me know you're here and I'll see if we can fit you in. So I've got an extra one tomorrow, which I hadn't planned for.
Yeah,
I hope something comes of it, but it's, there is some, you then get some blockers in, things don't work that way, or you're too diverse, or you're too senior, or you're too this, or you're too that. But if nothing else, my view is good people, work with good people, good things will happen when good things happen.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I wouldn't be surprised. Now I'm making an assumption and you can correct me, but I wouldn't be surprised that even in the cases where, where there's no immediate possibility to do something together, people will very often go out of their way to maybe introduce you to someone else who can be
That's
helpful.
right. Exactly what's happening. And or even interesting things. I had a conversation yesterday with somebody that runs their own small startup in Hamburg. And he said, I don't have the finances and the funding to put a new staff member on, but if you want to come to Hamburg and help start up your own business, you can use my office. I nearly fell off my chair, he says, so if we can make it, so you just start different things, you never know what comes out of left field.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not prepared to put yourself out there and take that risk, nothing changes.
Yeah, I believe. And that's also the best way actually to find out where you can add value, where you can provide some benefit to people. I mean, you have now had a lot of conversations. It's very difficult to generalize for a whole country because there's 80 million people here and very diverse. What is one thing that you learned that, for example, here in Germany would be an opening for someone who wants to start a new life, a new career? One need that you learned that you could address very well?
I think for me, one of the things that's lacking, it seems to come across quite common, and particularly in Germany, is, and I'll explain it a bit more, it's a bit about using my skills in building relationships. There seems to be a lack of translators, and I don't mean translators from English to German. It's a bit about how do we all work as one, and how does one team talk to another team? How do we actually translate to get the better outcome? Because people are working in all these little silos. And that seems to be one of the key issues when I'm talking to either private industry and or startups and or the NGO sector, is they're struggling with how do we get people working better as one and translating for people the things we're trying to achieve, because everybody's still in the task focused, not the outcome focused.
Yeah. This is very German thing, this process oriented thinking.
That's right.
Yeah.
And they're wanting to change it, but in some cases they're not sure how, and culturally not sure the best approach for that would be my key learning on this trip so far.
So there's definitely an opportunity for you here.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm trying to leverage that as much as possible, because that's what I am. I've even known my own skill set. That's probably my, for all I've got really good, strong commercial, business, technical skills. That's probably one of my leading skills, is how do I actually bring people together and for the single purpose, and the way I often repeat it in Australia, and it doesn't quite make sense probably in the translation, Chris, is how do I make 1 + 1 = 3?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I understand what you mean. Yeah. Great. James Ritchie, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your tips how to build connections in a foreign culture. Just to put together what you said, and please add if I forget something. Basically, your TED is start from the other person's perspective, spend really some time to learn about their actual desires and wishes, which is also a show of respect towards them. be consistent, reach out again and again in a professional and friendly way if there's no initial response. And there was a third point that slipped my mind right now.
Yeah, it's actually just been about, one, being open, respectful, but thinking about the outcomes. What are we trying to achieve, and what do you want? What do they want? Be clear, open, and engaging. And don't close off with cultural biases that you have. Lots of people come to different places and say, and even people have told me, the Germans are like this, the Germans are like that. Well, my view is individuals are very different. There are thematical themes, but my view is I treat everybody openly and be very transparent in who I am as an individual, and people either like that or they don't. And I'm very comfortable in that.
Yeah, I think that's really, really true. That's why we also have this tribe here in the Living Unconventionally community, which you can join, by the way, at livingunconventionally.com/Facebook. If you want to become part of our little tribe of people who chase their passions around the world. You have to find people who look more to what we have in common, who look more about results, as you say, outcomes, than about trying to find ways to reject you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And if anybody, in your tribe ever, they want to reach out, chat, I'm always open to anybody talking to me or contacting me. I have, I'm very transparent, vanilla. I can, as my father used to say, Chris, I can talk underwater.
Yeah, I will if you allow, I will put a link to your LinkedIn profile
Perfect.
On our website so people can reach out to you.
Absolutely.
Last question from my side, if someone wants to reach out to you and wants to contribute to something that you wish very much, what is one big wish that you have, one big goal that you try to achieve right now, where you would welcome people if they could contribute to that?
The thing for me would be just looking for a good opportunity across Germany to make a difference with an organisation and or a community that we serve. If there's things going on that I can make a contribution to, I would love to be involved. And mainly around making a difference to the communities we work in and the communities we serve.
Yeah, that's very nice final words. James Ritchie, thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you, as always.
Thank you for the opportunity, Chris. As I said, I always like our conversations, and I think, in many ways we are like-minded, but we come from very different perspectives, which gives us a richness of conversation and a close bond. So thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel the same, James.
Mm.
If you enjoyed this conversation and want to hear more people who ditch their 9-to-5 jobs, chase their passions around the world, try to contribute something to our little world that will make the world a little bit a better place and also feed you, then I invite you to listen again next Monday with the next episode of the Living Unconventionally podcast. Please subscribe to this podcast so you get a reminder when the new episode is out. And if you like, join the Living Unconventionally community on livingunconventionally.com/Facebook. My name is Chris Piak, and I hear you again next week. Bye-bye.